Good morning to you, Thursday morning. Hello and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this day, and so glad you could join us for our Bible talk for today. May I remind you, if you haven't seen already, that our friend Philip Swan, who was working here once as a priest, assistant priest for a while, is retiring, and his farewell service is this Sunday at St Bart's Church, 5:30 in the evening. You'd be very, very welcome to come if you'd like to. The band are playing, the bishop's coming. There's going to be some messages from across the world from Anthony Arrell and Karen Crawley, one or two other interesting people as well. So anyway, if you'd like to come at 5:30 this coming Sunday evening. But to our Bible reading for today, and we are in Mark and chapter 1. I'd like just to recap where we've got to so far, what I might call the all-important context, and here is the map. Now, Jesus, if you remember, was baptized probably round about down here somewhere. Then, after John was handed over, Jesus comes to the Sea of Galilee, and it's round the Sea of Galilee that he calls his disciples. And then he kind of sets up really in Capernaum. Now, Capernaum is here. Capernaum is, you might call, Peter's hometown. And you might say Capernaum becomes the kind of the base for Jesus' ministry. And it's in Capernaum that this morning's reading happens, in the synagogue. Now, synagogue was basically a place where people got together to worship, and they'd study the scriptures and they'd worship together. It wasn't a temple, but wherever Jews were together, they'd gather together. And it's interesting the way it was kind of led. Nowadays, we expect our vicars to both manage churches and preach in them as well. In those days, each synagogue would have its own management committee or manager, and then different people would preach each week, and it was kind of an open invitation. And it's with that in mind, I guess, accepting this open invitation, you find Jesus preaching at the synagogue of Capernaum in this morning's reading. And of course, it's Sabbath, so it would have been Saturday, but I suspect this was a Saturday which probably remained in the memory of anyone that was there. Without further ado, Mark's Gospel, chapter 21. And again, try and imagine this. It must have been quite a scene. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then, there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed and kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the evil spirits, and they come out and they obey him." And at once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Like I said, it must have been a Saturday morning that would have gone down in the memoirs for anyone who was there. It must have been quite a scene. But I think there's one thing in particular that I think we are supposed to see in this reading, which comes out a couple of times, which is the authority of Jesus. Jesus is somebody who's clearly got massive authority. And they say that because twice it says they were amazed by his authority. Now, the word amazed doesn't quite do it justice. The Greek word is much stronger than that. It means literally struck or smitten. It means literally struck. They were absolutely struck by the incredible authority Jesus had. And I think what we need to get from this morning's reading is just the sheer authority of the person of Jesus. He had so much authority in him that the people that were there were absolutely struck by it. And I think there are two things about the incident with the synagogue which we can see, which leads to demonstrate Jesus' authority. Firstly is his teaching. Now, interesting enough, Mark doesn't actually tell us what Jesus says. He does tell us it's not as the scribes. Now, there's some speculation it could be that scribes always used to quote Rabbi this and Rabbi that, whereas Jesus, of course, because he's the Son of God, just quotes himself. There is some speculation that might have been one of the differences. But I think it's much more simple than that. I think there was just something about the person of Jesus that when he spoke, people listened. I think he had a natural, innate authority. I think he had an integrity. I think he had something about the way he spoke was striking. There was something unusually authoritative about when he spoke. Ultimately, may not have known it, but it was God speaking. They were listening to the voice of God. And I guess I just think from the teaching here, I think Mark wants us to see that Jesus just had this incredible authority. That when he spoke, there was something unusually authoritative about it. So much so that people were actually struck by what they heard. So I think actually the contents of the teaching for Mark aren't that important. I think what Mark wants us to see here, what we need to get from this, is that Jesus has the authority. Not just in the teaching of Jesus, but in the person of Jesus. The way he was, the way he spoke, as much as what he said. There was something massively authoritative about Jesus. I think that's the thing. So I think the way he taught demonstrates why people were struck by his authority. The other thing is this rather strange incident with the man with the unclean spirit, and it must have been really quite scary and unpleasant for anyone that's there. But I think there are just one or two interesting things from it. Firstly, that interesting that even though many of the scribes and so on didn't recognize who Jesus was, the evil spirit inside the man did. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. The evil spirit recognized him as being the Son of God. And Jesus demonstrated his authority by casting the evil spirit and setting the person free. But it's also interesting that the evil spirit describes Jesus as what he calls the Holy One of God. Now, I didn't realize this, but the only other person in the Bible who's described as the Holy One of God, the only other person who's got the Holy One of God, is Samson in the Old Testament. Now, Samson was a man of unusual physical strength. He was also somebody who was capable of breaking bonds and being set free when he was pinned down and so on. He had massive physical strength. He had far higher strength than anybody else around him. And I think it's interesting that the evil spirit describes Jesus as the Holy One of God. In other words, Jesus had unusual strength. There was something about him. I don't mean physical strength, but he had power, including over unclean spirits. And like Samson had the power to free people from their bonds, so Jesus has the power then and has the power now to free people from bonds today, that they can live the glorious liberty of the children of God. He came not to have victories over people, but to set people free, like he did with this poor man in the synagogue. So I think what we need to see from this morning's reading is the massive authority of Jesus. There was something, and as I say, he had so much authority that people were struck by it. Firstly, by the way he taught. As much as what he said, the way he taught, he had so much authority that when he spoke, there was something spellbinding, there's something unusually authoritative about what he said, because ultimately people were hearing the voice of God. But also, he had power, not just in clever teaching, but also he had the power to set people free. And he set that man free. And in being referred to as the Holy One of God, describes Jesus like Samson had power in the Old Testament to free people from chains and bonds and that sort of stuff. So Jesus has the power to set people free from bonds and chains in their lives today, that we might not be held back, that we might live life to its fullness, that we might enjoy the glorious liberty of being God's children. And my friends, may we know again the authority of Jesus in our lives. May we hear his, and may we speak with his authority. And may we also know his freedom. May we know his liberty. May we know the glorious liberty of being his children. And may you know that his presence with you today. And may you know his freedom and his love surrounding and bathing you today. God bless you. Have a